Right, okay. Second revision session on Weimar and Nazi Germany. This one's going to cover the early stages of the Nazi Party up until the von Papendeel and Hitler becoming Chancellor. So we'll start with the early stages of the Nazi Party. Not an awful lot to know at this point, apart from Hitler began his political career early in 1919 when he joined the German Workers' Party, which was led by Anton Drexler. He'd eventually take control of the party from Anton Drexler. Nice bit of knowledge if you can know that it's led by Anton Drexler, and it doesn't have National Socialist in the title at this point, it's just the German Workers' Party. Okay, he quickly rose through the ranks because he was such a gifted speaker. I think he was member number 555, but they added the 500 to the membership numbers because it made them seem like they were more popular than it was. I think he was actually member number 55, but his membership card said 555. He became head of propaganda for the German Workers' Party, and his speeches were so popular that he managed to single-handedly boost the membership of the German Workers' Party, and eventually overtook Drexler, ousted Drexler, and became the leader. His speeches were all about nationalism and anti-Semitism, and this kind of leads on to the next section, which is how he developed the Nazi Party identity. And what you really need here is the 25-point program. Okay, so the 25-point program, as you can imagine, has 25 points in it, and it's basically the statement of what the Nazi Party is, what they're all about. Okay, there are three major aims that Hitler wanted to achieve. He wanted to make Germany great again, make it into a great power. So a lot of his rhetoric and the identity of the Nazi Party was built around that, making Germany great. He wanted to rip up the Treaty of Versailles. He believed it was a travesty, a stab in the back, as we looked at in the last revision session. And he wanted to unite all German-speaking people. So if you kind of think of those as the three unifying points of the 25-point program, okay? Make Germany great again, rip up the Treaty of Versailles, and unite all German-speaking people, which means taking back all those territories that were taken away from Germany as part of the Treaty of Versailles, and also joining together with Austria in what was known as the Anschluss. Now, the Treaty of Versailles banned the Anschluss, and Hitler wanted to carry it out. Okay. Another feature of the German Workers' Party's identity was anti-Semitism, blaming Jews for all the problems that Germany was facing. A Jewish conspiracy, a Jewish global conspiracy. And if it wasn't the fault of the Jews, it would be the fault of the communists. So it was those two groups that were really targeted. They were scapegoats for the German Workers' Party. Okay. Another thing that happened at this time was, part of his drive as the head of propaganda was he gave the SA uniforms. He made the brown shirts, and he put Ernst Röhm in charge of them, and they became, they're basically Freikorps, ex-soldiers, disaffected thugs who didn't believe that Germany should have lost the war, blamed Jews and communists for the stab in the back and the hated Weimar government, and just looked very smart and looked like the kind of organisation that young men might want to join. Young men who would have wanted to join the army but couldn't because the Treaty of Versailles restricted it to 100,000 men, joined the SA instead. So it really boosted the popularity of the party. Okay, so that's the early years. Next we'll look at the Munich Putsch. Putsch, remember, from the Cap Putsch, it's just a posh word for rebellion. Okay, now you'll remember from the last revision session that the 1923 hyperinflation crisis was just pretty much over by the time the Putsch happened. The Munich Putsch happened in November, which was around about the same time that Gustav Stresemann was just starting to fix the problems. They hadn't been fixed yet, so it was at the height really of that kind of economic crisis. People were starving, their savings were worth nothing. So Hitler believed that this was a perfect opportunity to take advantage of the civil unrest in the country at the time. Okay. The Weimar Republic seemed weak. It seemed like it couldn't fix the problems. It couldn't pay the reparations. It couldn't get the French out of the Ruhr. And Germans were just angry. So it seemed like a good time to Hitler. He came up with this plan. came up with this plan. You will be on YouTube now. Get it after.
Am I okay to sit in here?
Yeah, as long as you're quiet and you don't mind being on YouTube, because you're now on YouTube. We've done Hitler's early leadership of the German Workers' Party and the early identity of the Nazi Party with a 25-point programme, and the three main aims, which were to make Germany great again, rip up the Treaty of Versailles, and unite all German-speaking people. Okay, so we're just starting the Munich Putsch, and we've just said that Hitler and the Nazi Party believed that 1923 was a great time to start the Munich Putsch, to overthrow the government. Remember, that's what they wanted to do, overthrow the government, because so many people were upset in Germany at that time because of hyperinflation and the occupation of the Ruhr. Okay, so the plan was to take advantage of a meeting with Gustav von Kahr, who was the head of Bavaria, okay, basically like the mayor of Bavaria, or the chief politician, governor of Bavaria, who was also a nationalist, so in theory should have sympathised with Hitler's aims. Take advantage of this meeting, commandeer the meeting, and then march on the headquarters, or the army barracks in Munich, and seize control. That was the plan. Unfortunately, it didn't go to plan. Von Kahr escaped, alerted the authorities, and after a brief shootout, in which I think 14 people were killed. I've got 14 in my head, but I can't verify that, but just double check. I think there's 14 people were killed in the Munich Putsch, and Hitler ran away and was eventually arrested and sent to prison. Now, the question I set there is, how did the Munich Putsch actually help him in the long run? Although it was a failure, it did mean that Hitler became a celebrity. It really raised his profile across the country. And when he was put on trial in January 1924, he had a very sympathetic judge, or set of judges, who historians now think he'd been given the nod that he was going to be let off with a lenient sentence. So with that confidence, he kind of turned the trial into a bit of a stage, and he showboated, and he kind of stood up and used it as a political platform and expounded on his 25-point programme and what he believed was the right direction for Germany. And the judges kind of let him do that. And at the end of it, there was no question that he was guilty. He was caught leading an army trying to overthrow the government, which is treason. And people died as a result of this. And yet, he was only given a sentence of 5 years, and he was let out within 9 months. So that just shows you how lenient the judges were, and it supports this view that perhaps the judges were kind of on his side in some way, right? So it made him a celebrity. And when he left prison in November 1924, he was well known. He'd gone from being an unknown minor politician in Bavaria to being a national celebrity, the guy who was brave enough to try and take on the government. He was a hero to nationalists, certainly. Okay, so he used the trial to kind of expound on his 25-point programme and the idea of Lebensraum, and how they needed to expand and unite all German-speaking people, and all the rest of it. Okay, but when he came out of prison, after a brief holiday from politics, he went back into the party and he changed tactics. So the next thing that I've written on the board is, how did the Nazis change their tactics after the Munich Putsch? Hitler famously said, we need to hold our noses and enter the Reichstag. Okay? This was a response to the golden years that we talked about in the last revision session. The Locarno honeymoon. Okay, so Stresemann is saving Germany at this point from 1923 up to 1929. This is a bad time to be an extremist politician, because nobody's interested in extremist politics. Everybody's doing all right, or most people are doing all right. There's near enough full employment. All women have the vote. People seem to be happy. This is called the Locarno honeymoon for a reason. So Hitler realizes he's not going to be able to take control through a revolution. The Munich Putsch failed. The time was perfect for a putsch, but it didn't work. So he knows he's got to do it the traditional route. So he put himself back at the head of the party, became supreme leader again after a brief spell away from the party, and he restructured the Nazi party. Okay, so he made the brown shirts into more of a ceremonial organisation. They weren't ever going to be the army that Ernst Röhm wanted them to be. Now park that, because that comes back as a source of tension between Ernst Röhm and Hitler later on. That's one of the reasons for the Night of the Long Knives and Ernst Röhm actually being murdered. Okay. He also put Goebbels in charge of propaganda. Goebbels was another evil genius who managed to really raise the profile of the Nazi Party, get funding from the middle classes and turn it into propaganda gold. He created Gauleiters, okay, local leaders. So the Nazi Party had local branches all over the country. It became a national party as opposed to just a Bavarian party. And this was led through these local leaders, otherwise known as Gauleiters, Gauleiters, okay, regional branches. And he also created new organisations for the youth Nazi Party, or the teachers Nazi Party, the students Nazi Party, the women's Nazi Party, okay, so to try and appeal to specific demographic groups across Germany. And it was extremely effective. Again, it's part and parcel of the propaganda. He's really kind of changing the image of the Nazi Party, going from a revolutionary organisation to a more kind of traditional political one. But they've also still got this kind of semi-militant kind of image, because they still walk around in their uniforms, the brown shirts, okay, so they're still kind of one foot in a military image, but another foot in being a traditional political organisation, okay, so he's going for the votes now, he's going for the elections. And it kind of bubbles along like this. The Nazis are getting like 12 seats in the Reichstag, so they're a very minor party, real fringe party. Hitler's quite famous because of the Munich Putsch, but they're still a party, a little bit like Nigel Farage, if you remember Nigel Farage, okay? Quite a big, quite well known himself, but his party, UKIP, is not particularly popular in Parliament. Right. And then we move on to the Great Depression. So this goes along till 1929, and we get the Wall Street crash. Okay, so the question I set is, how did the Wall Street crash and Bruning's failures help Hitler? And we've got several ways. Economically, people are pushed to the extremes in times of economic hardship. We've got Bruning being a complete disaster as a chancellor and making things more difficult for ordinary people, and again pushing people further out towards the extremes. Hitler benefits. And we've got the decline of democracy, the use of Article 48. People are getting used to politicians telling them what to do rather than actually their votes making any difference. Okay, so first of all, the Wall Street crash, economic hardship. The USA basically cashed in its loans, called in its loans. Remember the 40 million that it lent to Germany to kickstart their industry and start paying off the reparations again. They asked for it back. So the bottom fell out of the German economy. Germany's economy collapsed. Industrial production went into decline. That's a key phrase you keep seeing again and again. You'll see it when we look at Hitler's economic policies again. Industrial production went into decline. Okay? There was mass unemployment, with 1.6 million people out of work in 1929 compared to 6 million unemployed by February 1932. So massive increase in the number of unemployed people. And as we know, in times of hardship, people are pushed to the extremes. So which parties benefit from this? The Communist Party of Germany, the KPD, and the nationalist parties, primarily Hitler's National Socialist Party, as it's become now, okay, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party. There's also a nationalist party, but they're much more minor than the Nazi Party, okay. Second section, Bruning's policies and how this made things more difficult for people. Okay, Heinrich Bruning, he introduced tough economic policies to try and keep inflation from rising like it did in 1923. Increased the cost of imported food, which made the cost of living higher. People are starving and they've got to pay more for the food that they can't get hold of. Raising food prices. He reduced salaries and pensions and increased taxes. Okay, and he cut back on unemployment benefits. Nice key word. He was known as the Hunger Chancellor. Right? He basically starved people and pushed them out towards the extremes even more. Okay, increased discontent within society. This meant that the workers were more inclined again to join the communists or the National Socialists. Okay, and finally, the last section on this little bit about the Great Depression. The government became less democratic. because Bruning was so unpopular and his policies were so unpopular, he had to rely on Hindenburg's support in pushing through his laws using Article 48. Remember Article 48, one of the weaknesses of the Weimar Constitution. The more he used Article 48, the more people lost faith in the democratic basis of the Weimar Republic. They realised that Bruning and Hindenburg can rule without the Reichstag. The Reichstag has very little meaning when you use Article 48, and people begin to get used to it. Okay, by 1932, Bruning regularly bypassed Parliament to force his economic measures through. Okay, and this kind of sets things up perfectly for Hitler. Okay, so we get the rise of the Nazis. How did the Nazis increase their popularity during the Depression? Okay, so we know that people were really upset, they were really angry, and we can see this increase in support for both the Communist Party, the KPD, and the Nazi Party. Okay, both parties were basically in competition for the same votes, the working classes. Okay, where most of the votes were going to come from, the working classes. Between 1928 and 1932, membership of the Communist Party grew from 130,000 to almost 300,000. But the Nazi Party membership grew even more rapidly. Okay? Not least because of Hitler's own propaganda machine, Goebbels' propaganda machine, and also because of Hitler's own speeches. The fact that he kept banging this drum about making Germany great again and slagging off the Treaty of Versailles and saying that was all to blame. And he was able to, the fall of the Wall Street crash itself, Hitler was able to pin a lot of Germany's problems on decadent, as he called it, Jewish living in America. Blaming that, because it happened in America, right? The Wall Street crash happened in America, and this global depression followed suit, and he just slagged off America. He said, this is what happens when you entrust your economic future to a decadent, Jewish-led economy, as he falsely claimed the American economy was. Okay, so it lent support to the propaganda that he'd been peddling for nearly a decade, right? So the Nazi Party kind of went into overdrive then, the propaganda machine went into overdrive, and Hitler started appealing to specific groups. Okay, the Nazis promised a more prosperous future to everybody. By 1930, membership had grown to 300,000. Nazi Party's popularity soared. Unemployed men, particularly, were drawn to the SA. Okay, this was a way of gaining some kind of respectability from the ashes of the global depression. You get a nice, flash, crisp, ironed brown shirt rather than the rags that they were going around from job to job in. Okay. Obviously, a lot of people were drawn to, particularly in certain parts, southern Germany, Austria particularly, were drawn to the anti-communist and anti-Jewish message, anti-Semitic message that Hitler was offering. And also, as compared to the KPD, the Communist Party, the Nazi Party was really well organised. Remember, in 1926, Hitler had reorganised the party. He'd basically laid the foundations for what happened 3 or 4 years later, with the Gauleiters in local communities, the specific organisations for youth groups, women and students and teachers and all the rest of it. Okay, they were ready to hit the ground running when people started to become disaffected as a result of the depression. So they really hoovered up large areas of Germany's population. The middle classes, because the Nazi Party were more respectable than the Communist Party, so they got a lot of middle class support, and that was really good in itself because it meant that Goebbels got more money, because the middle classes had more money to donate to the party, which meant Goebbels could then churn that into propaganda, which then led to more support as well. Okay, also wealthier people, businessmen, were more likely to, if they saw the writing on the wall and they saw the population being pushed to the extremes, they would be more afraid of the communists than they would be of the Nazi Party. Okay, much more afraid of communists, because remember, communists want everyone to be equal, which is basically the death sentence for capitalism. So they're going to throw their support behind Hitler if they see it's a competition between those two. So again, more money goes into the Nazi Party coffers, and Goebbels is able to use that to further the propaganda machine. Okay. So last thing I want to talk about, the very last thing, we're up to 20 minutes, we're going 20 minutes, and this will take about another 3 or 4, I think. Okay, so Hitler becoming Chancellor, the von Papen deal. As the depression continued and Bruning's failure was exposed, more people were voting for the Nazi Party. They were becoming the largest party in the Reichstag, and traditionally you'll remember that the leader of the largest party in the Reichstag should be given the office of Chancellor, right? The second most important politician in Germany after the president. But it's the president's job to appoint the Chancellor, and Hindenburg, the president, hated Hitler, okay? Hated Hitler and did not want him to become Chancellor. He would do everything he could to stop Hitler becoming Chancellor. I think it's a bit late for that, Megan. I think it's probably on there. Okay. So what Hitler did was he stood for the presidential election. He actually, when Hindenburg's tenure was up in 1932, Hitler ran for office as the president. Now, if he'd have got this would have been perfect for him. As president, he could invoke Article 48 as much as he wanted, basically rewrite the constitution and become a dictator for life. But he didn't win. However, what he did do was win well. Okay, lose well. He didn't become Chancellor, but he got a big old bite of the vote. Okay, right, so Hindenburg got 53% of the vote and Hitler got 36.8% of the vote. So he didn't become president, but he did really well. Goebbels organised this propaganda campaign called Hitler over Germany. Basically, Hitler was one of the first politicians to fly around the country that they were trying to get elected in. And he flew to every major city and town. He really went for it in this kind of election campaign, and it worked. Well, almost worked. He lost highly, if you know what I mean. Okay. Anyway, Hindenburg won, but Hitler was now a massive star for the right wing. Okay, he was loved by the right wing. He might not have been president, but he was doing very well. Now, in May 1932, Bruning was sacked and replaced by Franz von Papen. Okay, so we've got von Papen as the Chancellor. But the Nazis became the most popular party in the Reichstag in July. Hitler demanded that he should be given the job of Chancellor. Hindenburg refused. Okay, so there's conflict in there. What does Hitler do? Well, he keeps forcing re-elections by getting his members of the Reichstag, his politicians, the members of the Nazi Party, to just walk out. Because if a third of the Reichstag walk out, it triggers a re-election. So Hitler just basically cripples government. Nothing can be done. No laws can be passed in the Reichstag because every time they try to do anything, the brown shirts or the members of the Nazi Party just walk out of the Reichstag. Okay, so however, Nazis lost 34 seats in the November 1932 election, and it looked like they were losing popularity. December 1932, Hindenburg replaced Papen with one of his own advisors, Kurt von Schleicher. Now, this is the first attempt at a deal with the Nazi Party, but it's not with Hitler. What Schleicher does is he tries to go behind Hitler's back, and he offers the vice-chancellorship, the third most powerful politician in Germany, to Strasser, Gregor Strasser, one of Hitler's deputies. Okay, remember what Schleicher is trying to do here is cause divisions in the Nazi Party and basically kill the Nazi Party dead. Okay, by cutting Hitler out. Okay, now Hitler gets wind of this and he sacks Strasser, and the Schleicher deal with Strasser falls through. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen. Hitler's got a very long memory, and in the night of the long knives, both Schleicher and Strasser were murdered. Okay, for this attempt, basically in revenge for this attempt to split the Nazi Party. Okay, so the Schleicher deal with Strasser falls through. So what they try next is the von Papen deal, which is von Papen will be vice-chancellor. They will offer the chancellorship to Hitler on the condition that he only has two other members of the Nazi Party in his cabinet, right? The cabinet is basically the inner circle of politicians. Okay, so Hitler will be Chancellor, but he's only allowed to have two other Nazi Party officials in his cabinet. Hindenburg will be President, and they hope that between them, Hindenburg and von Papen will be able to control him. Okay? What von Papen actually says, a nice quote here, in 2 months' time we will have pushed Hitler so far into a corner, he'll be squeaking. Okay? So massively inaccurate evaluation of Hitler's political acumen there. And that's where we leave it, really. We've got Hitler is made Chancellor. He's got what he wanted. Okay. The next step for Hitler is consolidating his power, making himself far more powerful than von Papen and Hindenburg hope he will be. And for that to happen, we need the Reichstag fire, the Enabling Act, and all the rest of it that comes after. But that's the next section. Okay. That's achieving total power. How do the Nazis achieve and consolidate their power? Right. 25 minutes that took. Not bad.